China's agriculture has been hit hard by floods, drought, and a locust plague. Now, a plant-based disease is wreaking havoc on the country's wheat crops. Hong Kong police are making a new round of arrests this Wednesday. And in the U.S., young New Yorkers show their support for their Hong Kong peers. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo advances reciprocity for U.S.-China relations. He established new rules Chinese diplomats would have to follow. He also laid out a plan for universities and their dealings with China. And the Department of Defense issued its yearly report to Congress. The 200-page report says China is looking to strengthen its overseas military presence, which could target Taiwan and beyond. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A new round of heavy rain has hit southwest China, but the flooding that started more than a month ago in eastern China still has not subsided. In one part of Anhui province, tens of thousands of people remain homeless. That's because their houses are still submerged in 7-foot-deep floodwater. The nearby Lu River embankment was dug open over a month ago. It was done to divert the overflowing river water into that area in order to save other wealthier areas. At the time, floodwater from the river roared towards the surrounding villages. The water level rose to almost 30 feet high. Now, after around 40 days, the water level remains 7 feet high. It's not clear when it will fully drain away. Chen Liang, a local from the flooded region, told us that tens of thousands of people there are unable to go home. Instead, they are forced to rent outside apartments. Chen says he received one bag of rice and some oil as aid from authorities, but no money. To protect his identity, we gave him a pseudonym.
In the beginning, we went to our relatives and friends. It was fine to stay for a couple of days, but not for a long time. We have a population of tens of thousands. We are all outside renting houses. Now many people have no food to eat, and the government does not care.
Chen Liang recalled that authorities asked them to evacuate the night before the flood began at the end of July. But they didn't warn locals that the embankment would be excavated, nor that floodwater would soon soak their homes. Locals weren't allowed to move anything out of their homes or take any baggage with them. Many were even forced to buy new clothes. Chen said what angered him the most is that authorities refused to admit the embankment was dug open on purpose. Instead, they claimed the embankment was destroyed due to the flooding.
I can't swallow it. The embankment was clearly dug open, and the water was directed right to us. Why didn't the government admit that instead of talking about dam failure? Why? We made such a big sacrifice. Don't we deserve an explanation?
In recent weeks, Chen and other villagers reached out to all levels of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, hoping for help from authorities, but no officials appear willing to receive them. So far, they've even been unable to find somewhere to appeal. Chen invested his entire life savings into his house and his 2 shops. But now he says everything inside the shops has been drenched, causing a $600,000 loss. He says people are suffering, but notes that no one wants to listen. He added that officials put disaster donations in their pockets and that locals feel helpless. In the end, he said people in his area have given up hope in the regime. Amid severe flooding, droughts, and a locust plague, China is now facing a food supply crisis. What's more, a plant-based disease is now wreaking havoc in the country's wheat crops. The disease is called wheat stem rot. So far, it's impacted about 2 million acres of farmland in China's eastern Shandong province, spreading across 15 cities and more than 100 counties. Authorities recently issued a notice about strengthening wheat stem rot prevention measures. It stated that in recent years, the disease has spread rapidly and now poses a major threat to wheat production. The disease reduces the number of grains per ear, severely affecting the total yield. At the same time, another kind of plague may also endanger China's agriculture. In the northeastern province of Liaoning, a type of moth was spotted for the first time in the region. It's called the fall armyworm. It's been discovered in 30 villages so far. This kind of moth is known for its ability to cause major damage. It can migrate and reproduce quickly. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization considers it a major global agricultural pest. Next, we speak with a former Chinese vice mayor who fled to the U.S. in fear of the Chinese Communist Party's persecution. In the second half of our exclusive interview, he reveals the inside story of China's corruption and round-the-clock surveillance, even on regime members.
With the help of American human rights activists, former Chinese city mayor Li Chuanliang fled to the U.S. His journey was sparked by the wish to save his friend Kong. The key to his successful escape was that he detached from the Chinese Communist Party or CCP system 3 years ago. At the same time, he also quit his position as the vice mayor of Jiqi City.
I fully quit voluntarily from my position in 2017. It's not easy to get approval. Normally, they just fire you. I also gave up my public officer status. If I didn't, there was no way I could have gotten my passport. Impossible.
Amid the Communist Party's political environment, it's a rare move to leave a position in local government. But Li emphasized that he wasn't made for politics.
I've been insisting on freedom of belief and speech. I would make comments sometimes. It's not suitable for a technical person like me to do politics.
Li is a finance expert and certified public accountant. He's been working on economic data analysis and management of economic sectors. He was given the promotion to vice mayor because Jiqi City's municipal management team needed a finance expert in order to make certain structural adjustments. He explained that his job was more about managing people's basic needs and trying to solve long-time problems like improving the city's water supply. But he added that as vice mayor, he witnessed the dark side of the Chinese regime.
This is a bad system. It's an arbitrary regime. I think the politics made by the system are corrupt.
He used the way buildings are often demolished, their inhabitants forced to relocate as an example. Forced demolitions are a major problem in China. He explained that they're commonplace and happen on a large scale despite people's opposition. That's because it's an easy way for the regime to make profit.
The land developer benefits from doing so. They can make more profit out of that piece of land by using it in other ways. So they have to demolish the old structures on it. People definitely hate it.
Another example comes from the then municipal party secretary of Jiqi City. That official took a vacation to Sanya during Chinese New Year. It's a city well known for its beach resorts and upscale hotels. After the trip, he reimbursed himself for the cost of the trip using city funding, totaling around $150,000. Li noticed several illegal acts like this one and reported them, but higher-level officials sought revenge against him. As a result, his salary was suspended and his social and health insurance were canceled. He had no room to do or say anything and described feeling desperate. He says he believes a government system without the separation of powers is doomed to fail.
Anywhere in China, only one man has the last word. He's the supreme man. And who's that? It's the CCP's secretary.
Li and his friend discussed sensitive issues like this one on various occasions, using WeChat Messenger over the phone or during meals. But their talks became more and more risky. They knew it was risky, but didn't grasp the full extent of the danger.
Now, reporting each other is encouraged. Just like during the Cultural Revolution, maybe a son reports his father, friends report friends. It's like that.
Yet, he says that's not the worst part. He says the worst is the feeling of always being watched by Big Brother. And because of it, people dare not to speak out.
Project Sky Eye is watching from the sky, from the ground, through WeChat. It's monitoring you constantly, 24/7.
He told us that life in China is very different from that portrayed by China's state-run media. When a reporter brought up the country's alleged virus control and economic revival, he interrupted.
It's absolutely not like that. No, everyone carries a health coat, and that thing watches you round the clock. After this pandemic, everybody is now installed with a monitor, a tracker.
It wasn't easy for Li to escape and now to speak out in the U.S. about what's really happening in China. He said doing so means risking his life. Now that he's left the country, he says he worries more about his family that's still in China. But now there's no turning back. He explained that his courage has grown with the help of his legal representative in America. He also described how attending a speech by retired Hong Kong entrepreneur Mr. Elmer Yuan motivated him to step out into the public eye. Yuan has expressed public support for pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong and has helped them campaign for support.
Elmer Yuan said, "He does what he does all for our children. I'm exactly the same. How about our children? How can we let our next generation be enslaved like this?"
Just before a report was released, we received an update from Li. He said his family members were interrogated and 2 of his subordinates were detained. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News.
Now we take a look at a speech from China. Last week, in his speech, the spokesperson of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Zhao Lijian, said the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese people are like fish and water, flesh and blood. Chinese people are the copper wall and iron bastion of the Chinese Communist Party, and no one should ever try to break it.
中国人民就是中国共产党的铜墙铁壁。
Zhao wanted to send this message to U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. His remarks apparently irritated Chinese netizens. One of them says, "How can we be your iron shield without guns and cannons?" Then he quoted the Chinese national anthem, asking, "Do you mean to build a new Great Wall with the flesh and blood of the people?" Some said that these remarks hold some truth because the CCP have been known to kidnap Chinese people for the protection of the party. One netizen says, "Finally, they tell the truth." Days later, people found that the original post from the CCP media was deleted. In its yearly report to Congress, the Department of Defense says the Chinese regime is looking to strengthen its military presence overseas. The department says this could boost the regime's offensive strategies against the U.S. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on the report.
China's military, known as the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, already has a base in Djibouti, Africa. But according to the DoD, the communist regime is planning to expand the PLA in a way that could disrupt U.S. military operations. The Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense said in an interview with the American Enterprise Institute that China's been making more noise about its plan to build up its military.
Those basing facilities, as you notice, are important. They're testing, they're trying to explore, they're trying to understand, they're trying to devise and come up with plans about where and what types of bases and how they might use those facilities overseas best.
The DoD's yearly China military power report says the Chinese Communist Party is very likely considering building military bases in Myanmar, Thailand, and a number of other locations. These bases could give the regime more support to its naval, air, and ground forces if said countries let it happen. But the DoD is also looking at China's arsenal. The department estimates that China has about a low 200 nuclear warheads, and the CCP plans to double that number by the next decade.
Just looking at number of warheads by itself is not the entire picture, or doesn't paint a holistic understanding of where the Chinese are or maybe where they want to go.
The deputy assistant says the CCP is also looking to buff up its number of ballistic missiles, submarines, and other PLA weaponry. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper said on Twitter that modernizing the U.S.'s nuclear force and readiness is essential to a free and open Indo-Pacific region. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
A new report by the Department of Defense entitled China Military Power details how the Chinese regime's People's Liberation Army, or PLA, plans to expand its global naval presence. The 200-page report says these expansive military capabilities would allow the Chinese regime to dissuade, deter, or defeat third-party intervention, such as Taiwan and beyond. The report notes Beijing views Taiwan as one of its main threats to its national identity and is still considering using military force to obtain full reunification. To do so, the Chinese military has a number of ways to threaten the island, from an air and maritime blockade to a full-scale amphibious invasion. The report also highlights concerns over military imbalance in the Taiwan Strait, as well as China's official defense budget being nearly 15 times that of Taiwan's. According to the report, the PLA has been increasing its ability to launch an attack, but hasn't done so due to potential international intervention, noting the Taiwan issue is the most important and sensitive issue between the U.S. and China. Despite that, the PLA has been increasing military drills around the island as a show of strength. One strategic location is the South China Sea. Northeast Asia relies heavily on the flow of oil and commerce through the South China shipping lanes, including more than 80% of the crude oil to Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. While China claims sovereignty over the Spratly and Paracel Islands, 5 other governments also claim it. A survey by Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab delves into the military capabilities of the PLA in the South China Sea, noting the emphasis on informationalized warfare. According to the DoD report, China's leaders use tactics short of armed conflict to pursue China's objectives, including economic tools during periods of political tensions with countries that China accuses of harming its national interest. To counter that, Taiwan is developing asymmetric warfare capabilities. The report notes the U.S. will continue its arms sales to Taiwan in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act, adding while the U.S. maintains a one-China policy when it comes to Taiwan, it opposes unilateral actions aimed at altering the status quo. Fraud is commonplace in China, including in the academic and professional sectors. Publishing articles in academic journals has become linked to how professional titles are evaluated. As a result, publishing high numbers of them has become, for academic journal leaders, a profit. On Friday, detailed information about one of those leaders, Wang Shitong, was published on the front page of China's Journal of Discipline, Inspection, and Supervision. Wang was the former editor-in-chief of Newsfront magazine. The publication is sponsored by newspaper The People's Daily, a mouthpiece for the CCP. Wang helped publish nearly 1,000 articles from September 2019 to February 2020. In exchange, he received more than $1 million worth of bribe money. According to the allegations, Wang used the bribes to fund household purchases, financial management, personal travel expenses, among others. Wang was convicted back in April and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. China's military claims it launched 2 Dongfeng medium-range missiles towards the South China Sea last Thursday. But the U.S. military confirmed there were actually 4 of them. Some are now questioning what happened to the other 2. The Chinese army said the missiles targeted areas not far from the waters where U.S. aircraft carriers have been conducting drills in recent weeks. The following day, the U.S. Defense Department issued a statement condemning the CCP's missile launch. Chinese netizens have since been questioning the 2 versus 4 missile discrepancy. Photos of the missile wreckage were later posted online. The site was found in Donglan County inside the coastal province of Guangxi. The county happens to be located along the missile path. As a result, some netizens are speculating whether 2 of the missiles crashed midway through their flight path. But other netizens shared the local government's announcement, claiming the wreckage was simply a rocket propeller. The official announcement also asked nearby residents to evacuate before 7 a.m. on the 26th to avoid potential falling debris. Locals were instructed to listen carefully to their surroundings, observe the northwestern sky, and leave immediately if they spot any danger. Lastly, the announcement forbids taking photos without permission, adding that there will be severe consequences for those who do. Reporting by Shi Wenhui, NTD News. Secretary of State Pompeo listed some measures the U.S. will take against Chinese diplomats. His announcement comes after many years of CCP-imposed barriers against U.S. diplomats.
Pompeo outlined a set of new rules the U.S. will require Chinese diplomats to follow.
We're simply demanding reciprocity. Access for our diplomats in China should be reflective of the access that Chinese diplomats in the United States have, and today's steps will move us substantially in that direction.
The State Department will make senior Chinese diplomats in the U.S. get approval before they can visit university campuses or meet with local government officials. Previously, they only had to tell the department about their plans. Chinese diplomats will also have to get permission to hold cultural events with more than 50 people outside of their diplomatic missions. And all official social media accounts for Chinese embassies and consulates will need to be clearly identified as belonging to the Chinese regime. The move follows years of opaque barriers the regime has used against American diplomats working in China. This makes it difficult for U.S. envoys to conduct their businesses and connect with the Chinese people. Pompeo also urged universities to disclose all the Chinese businesses that invested in endowment funds. He suggested universities divest from Chinese companies on the Commerce Department entity list. Those are companies known to contribute to human rights violations, military coercions, and other abuses. And he asked that universities understand the risks of investing in Chinese companies listed on the U.S. stock exchanges. His remarks come on the heels of a letter from Undersecretary Keith Kroc to the governing boards of American universities. The letter outlines threats the CCP poses to academic freedom, human rights, and university endowments.
Now we turn to Hong Kong. Police arrested 27 Hong Kongers this Wednesday. They are detained for supporting student protesters last year. Police charged them with involvement in illegal assembly. Last November, Hong Kong's Polytechnic University saw one of the most intense conflicts of the year. Students and police were embroiled in a standoff for almost 2 weeks. Protesters later gathered near the university to support the students. Over 100 were arrested and later released. But now, Hong Kong police are going after them. The youngest is only 16 years old. They're scheduled to appear in court next Wednesday. A group of New Yorkers set up a mock entrance to a Hong Kong metro station in Manhattan. The move marks the one-year anniversary of a violent crackdown in Hong Kong's Prince Edward Station. NTD's Juliet Song has more.
The entrance to a Hong Kong metro station standing in New York's Union Square. The rail station in Hong Kong marks a violent clash in the city last year. Last August, Hong Kong police stormed into the city's Prince Edward Station. They assaulted passengers with batons and said they were targeting violent radicals.
This was the first time Hong Kong police just blatantly attacked citizens. I think it's horrifying but also sad that when the government can't stop the people, it only knows how to resort to violence instead of listening to people's hearts.
For Sue, showing support for Hong Kongers carries personal weight. He said one of his best friends in the city was arrested one night on his way home.
He was tortured afterwards. He was beaten up. He had no injuries before he was detained. Several hours later, after he was brought in, he was wounded so badly that he was sent to the hospital.
Sue explained that he often took the train at the Prince Edward Station when he was in Hong Kong. He says seeing the replica in New York is an emotional experience.
Places I knew in Hong Kong have become symbols to commemorate those who have been tortured. Actually, I feel so sad seeing this. No words can express my feelings.
At the event in New York, one volunteer said although she's never experienced what happened in Hong Kong firsthand, modern technology allows her to see exactly what the Chinese regime has been doing.
It's been eye-opening because, you hear about Tiananmen Square in 1989, but you didn't know exactly how that happened. And now that I'm seeing these photos of these protesters in Hong Kong in 2019, 2020, I'm realizing that the CCP really hasn't changed.
It's unclear if last year's clash caused any casualties. Hong Kong authorities refused to release footage of the metro incident. Volunteers commemorating the event said they're still demanding truth and justice. Juliet Song, NTD News.
The latest book by Thomas Piketty will most likely not be sold in China. That's because the French economist refused China's requests to censor it. One of his books that was published last year, called Capital and Ideology, hasn't made it to the mainland Chinese market. It's because it includes sections on inequality in the country. The author's publisher has received a 10-page list of requested cuts from Chinese publisher CITIC Press. Piketty said they wanted to cut almost all sections referring to contemporary China, especially mentions of inequality or transparency there. Now we turn to Eastern Europe. A Hungarian member of parliament just had what she called the most absurd moment of her political career. She received a letter from the Chinese embassy in Budapest last month. In it, the embassy said it strongly opposed her signing a joint statement in support of Falun Gong, a spiritual practice that's brutally persecuted in China. She posted the letter from the embassy on her Facebook page. She said something like this has never happened to her in her almost 10 years in parliament. The statement that she signed in support of Falun Gong was also signed by over 600 lawmakers worldwide. Over 30 U.S. lawmakers also penned individual letters of support. Falun Gong practitioners have been illegally detained, tortured, and used for slave labor in mainland China for over 20 years. According to a ruling by the Independent China Tribunal, many adherents in China have been and continue to be victims of forced organ harvesting. The pandemic has shown that the Chinese Communist Party is good at manipulating numbers, but it's not limited to disease prevention. It's also a common practice with its economic data. China's unemployment rate has long been one of the biggest mysteries hovering over the country's real economic situation. Core to the Chinese Communist Party's narrative of economic prosperity and its very legitimacy is its official unemployment rate, which has been inexplicably stable throughout the past 2 decades, hovering at around 4 to 5%. Even the pandemic had pushed it up slightly to only 5.9%, despite estimates by numerous experts that are 4 to 5 times higher. Until recently, Beijing had only counted urban workers who proactively registered for unemployment benefits with local governments. In 2018, Beijing changed its way of determining unemployment to a monthly survey of urban residents. But both models are plagued by the same flaws, leading to a persistent undercounting of China's jobless population. First, the low statistic excludes all of China's rural regions and reflects urban areas only. The reasoning is that all land is owned by the party, and thus rural residents are said to be employed by the state. Second, the current method is thought to undercount, if not totally exempt, China's massive migrant worker population, whose rural identities remain even though many of them have moved to urban areas to work. While tens of thousands of rural residents have moved to urban areas to work, their rural identities remain. Therefore, even if they've lost their jobs, they would not be counted among China's jobless population. That is, the 291 million rural migrant workers in China, or 1/3 of the Chinese labor force, are mostly excluded from the calculation. And even those who are qualified to report their unemployment status may not do so, because the paperwork is a hassle and unemployment benefits are paltry. According to Chinese media, they average about just $200 per month. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.